I'd like to welcome everybody back to the third day of the Turning the Tide conference. This is the Pentagon discussion day. We've had two talks already today, and now it's my pleasure to welcome Barbara Honegger to the stage to provide her presentation. Barbara.
Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, it is my distinct honor and especially privilege to present to you the compelling evidence that yes, there was a plane destroyed at the Pentagon. It was not Flight 77. It did not hit where the official story says at column 14 in wedge 1. It was destroyed outside the wall just before it would have otherwise hit the wall off of wedge 2, further to the left or north along the west wall, and it was destroyed into huge numbers of pieces. Now, the Pentagon is, in my opinion, the most important attack of 9/11, because only the Pentagon attack, which was on an iconic national military facility, just like the original Pearl Harbor in World War II, made the attack into the new Pearl Harbor, and most importantly, a sure pretext for war. This officer at the Pentagon, on 9/11, he was on national television, and they already had this "We're at War" banner ready to go. Now, as I mentioned in my presentation yesterday, the Pentagon attack is relevant today. It's not just history. Article 5 of the NATO Treaty, the Common Defense Provision, has been invoked only once to this very day, and that was on September 12th of 2001. Poland has just invoked Article 4 of the NATO Treaty, which is the step before Article 5. As you know, claiming weaponized Russian drones overflew its territory many times during attacks on Ukraine. To me, this feels like there is a brewing attempt to manufacture a pretext for a hot war. The actual facts about the Pentagon are central also to the current case against Saudi Arabia for its alleged participation in protecting some of the alleged hijackers. And the judge finally just let proceed to discovery and trial that very case. But what's important about that case, above and beyond the fact that there are thousands of 9/11 victims' family members who are the plaintiffs in that case, at the center of that case are only 2 of the alleged 19 hijackers, both allegedly on the Pentagon plane. So that makes what really happened at the Pentagon absolutely critical to the Saudi case. These are the 2 alleged hijackers, both Saudis, who are the focus of both the 28 pages that were finally released after almost 16 years, and they are Al-Hazmi and Al-Midar. They are both Saudis, and they were both allegedly on just one of the planes on 9/11, the Pentagon plane. The breakthrough to finally getting the 28 pages released was to realize that our movement needed what I called a Mike Gravel for the 28 pages, which was the real Mike Gravel, who was a neighbor of mine. He's no longer alive. And when his involvement was brought in, that very quickly led to the release of the 28 pages, and within a few weeks of that, to the very quick passage of the Justice Against Sponsors of Terrorism Act, shorthand JASTA, which was a true revolution in the foundation of international law, which removed sovereign immunity for not just Saudi Arabia, but every single foreign nation in the world that has been found credibly, that there is credible evidence that they have attacked American citizens on American soil. So the main areas of contention that the movement is trying to resolve: was the plane a 757? Was it even Flight 77? I must add that not a single witness ever reported 2 low-flying planes approaching the building, only one. Was there a wall impact at all? what was the final approach path? Was it the government's official so-called south path, or was it the north path? Is the official radar data to be trusted at all? So the challenge before everyone in the 9/11 Truth movement who's looking at the Pentagon, and I've been doing this for almost 24 years. I worked for the Department of Defense on 9/11 and for 11 years after, until I retired. So the challenge is that there is conflicting evidence, and witnesses also conflict with each other. I believe, after a very informed opinion, that this was designed into the actual inside job operation. And the solution, as my colleague in the Lawyers Committee for 9/11 Inquiry made very clear in his presentation opening today, the government simply has to release every single piece of withheld evidence, proving what actually happened, which they are still withholding over 24 years after the event, including especially all of the still withheld videos pertaining to the Pentagon, and especially, as you will see in a moment in this presentation, the videos from the Sheraton Hotel. So now we're going to look very briefly at the Pentagon attack scene. That is a aerial photograph, and you see that very important cloverleaf. That's going to be very important. The Pentagon had its own heliport, and you can see that with that kind of square concrete structure on the lawn. And so that's a very important fact. And maybe it's a little difficult to see, but just to the left, or to the north along the wall, beyond that helipad, there is the heliport firehouse. And on the roof of that firehouse was the helipad air traffic controller station, where witness Sean Boger was on 9/11. But did a plane strike where the government said it did? What really happened at the wall? So this next slide is a graphic that very clearly shows the relative locations of the helipad security building further to the left along the wall. That is the heliport firehouse. And the red dot is where the official story says Flight 77 impacted the building, going at approximately 530 miles per hour at the red dot. This slide is an approximate size of a 757 relative to the Pentagon. Building height, 71 feet, 156 feet length of that plane. Just shows you the approximate relative size. Now, this is important because this is from the official Pentagon Building Performance Report, that kind of white wedge, which actually continues through the midline between wedge 1 and 2, and then goes into the Defense Intelligence Agency further to the left through the so-called plane exit hole. That is the official story path. So, is the damage to the outer wall even physically possible for a 757, or for that matter, for any large plane, impacting allegedly at approximately 530 miles per hour? So this gives you an example of the size versus the alleged approach path. And Xander also used this slide. Okay, and as mentioned also, I believe by Craig, that throughout much of the morning, the foam and the water from the fire trucks were obscuring what is really important to be able to see. But fortunately, there is a definitive composite photo that is the most important evidence. And this is that photo. This is where the fuselage allegedly impacted. This is column 14. This is the official story. The Pentagon Building Performance Report says that the fuselage, which is about 12.5 feet in diameter, impacted right here. And as you will see, there's still a little bit of smoke, but the floor of the second floor, or the ceiling of the first floor, this part at least is still intact. And believe it or not, that vertical column where they claim this plane, huge plane going at 530 miles an hour impacted, it's still there. It is still there. Now, there is a major disagreement amongst the speakers as to the length of the first floor opening. All right. Now, the official story claims that a good half of the fuselage was in the upper half. But of course, that's not possible because that center column 14 is still there. But then if you go to the question of, well, how much of the plane could have gotten in here with that huge wingspan, let alone the fuselage, there are only, you can count them, there are only 50 or at most 60 feet of a continuous opening on the first floor, whereas our colleagues, represented by David Chandler in the next presentation, claim that there are 90 to 100 feet. They almost double what they claim is the continuous opening. But it's very clear there are still some destroyed columns on the other side of that 50 to 60 foot opening. So it is physically impossible for the official story to be true from this photograph alone. Oh, this is just to show that the Pentagon Building Performance Report own graphic, if you count them, only shows between 5 and 6 continuously missing columns on the ground, on the outer wall of the ground floor. In other words, what you've just seen is that column 14 on the Pentagon, which is claimed by the government as the impact of this massive plane going at 530 miles an hour, is literally the magic column, like magic column 79 at World Trade Center 7, which presumably singly failed and brought down all of World Trade Center 7 into its own footprint, 1/3 of the distance falling in gravity-only free fall speed. And it's like the magic bullet in the JFK assassination. This is another slide that shows where the official story claims the plane impacted at a slight angle down. And you will see that where the right engine would have been, there's still a column there. That's a massive engine. All right. The ground effect also, I won't go into exactly what that is, but it's a technical detail in aerodynamics that a plane cannot get lower to the ground normally than approximately half of its wing width, which would have put the plane, according to the official story, actually, between the second and the third floors, which isn't even what they claim. All right. So as the plane did not hit, I've proven that at the official story alleged impact point, what could have caused the outer wall damage of the alleged impact point? This is what caused that. Now, this is an extremely important photograph because it is not of the original fireball, which we're going to get to in a minute, but this is at the alleged impact point. But this is not from an impact. This is a later explosion from the inside out, and it's a massive explosion. And the way we know that it is not whatever caused the big black billowing smoke cloud to the right, which was from the burning generator trailer, is because that smoke cloud is already well established at the moment of the flash of that internal explosion inside the Pentagon. All right. Now, the released seismic records, the official seismic records from the closest readout station to the Pentagon for the alleged impact points. All right. A Air Force expert in crash analysis, crash data analysis, Peter Tiradera, in his outstanding book, states that this is the signal that is the smoking gun for controlled demolition. So somebody was doing controlled demolition at the very site that they claim that the plane impacted. The seismic, that seismic signal and that explosion is from the second major explosion before the outer wall collapsed. The actual evidence shows that the vast majority of actual wreckage from a real plane was extremely small confetti-like pieces that one witness who was there on the lawn said looked like literally millions of pieces, and that they were at, around, and beyond the helipad towards the wall. Now, I'm just reminding you where the helipad is and the wall beyond it. Now, this is the destruction by the helipad. This is the destruction on the other side of the firehouse, which you can see in the in the silhouette on this side of the fireball. Okay, so the firehouse is on this side, the fireball on the far side. This is what happened right by the helipad firehouse. All of this destruction, and there's the helipad on the left in the distance photo, and beyond you can see the fire that you saw earlier. This is another one by the helipad. And this is, the closer you get to the wall beyond the helipad, the damage or the wreckage from the plane gets larger and larger. This is a fireman walking across the helipad, more helipad damage. Okay, now this is an important photograph because you're looking from the helipad firehouse down towards the alleged impact point of Flight 77, and it's a little hard to see, but there's an almost pristine lawn there. So you can see that there's all this wreckage, and then you go down to off the wall where they claim a plane impacted, and it's this, which you've been shown before. So the real damage of a real plane, as you will see, was further to the left or the north along the wall than this, in the area of the helipad. Now, there were some larger wreckage pieces. This is one of the largest ones. Now, some of my colleagues believe these were physically planted. It's not possible to physically plant after the attack many of these large pieces, especially this one, but there were a couple of others that were this size or almost this size, okay? Now, these are FBI agents or plainclothes officials who were instructed to only pick up all of the larger pieces in the helipad area. Why weren't they asked to pick up pieces off of the alleged impact point area? Probably because there weren't any. There's another large piece. This was one of the part of an engine. Smaller pieces yet. All right. So I believe that this evidence definitively rebuts that there wasn't enough wreckage. And so some of my colleagues claim that the crash scene had to be staged. And by the crash scene, I don't mean in general. There's a lot of moving of pieces after they fell that happened. But by stage, they're basically referring to the idea that these plane pieces, all of these plane pieces and pieces of wreckage were planted. Not a single witness has come forward saying that they saw any pieces of wreckage planted before the attack. So April Gallup, this is very important. April Gallup is a very important Pentagon witness, and she went on record on this radio show. I could play the audio. However, I don't have the time to do that. But she stated that at least 3 months before 9/11, because she'd been on pregnancy and childbirth leave for almost 3 months, and her first day back was on September 11th with her infant son. She stated that before she went on pregnancy and childbirth leave, that she went through the wedge, the wall between the entrance between the two wedges, between wedge 2 on the north and wedge 1. And when she went into some of the spaces in wedge 1, that there were plane parts that looked like they were just pre-placed all over the floor of the Pentagon. So if you had an explosion at the big fireball on the wall that I just showed you at the alleged impact point, that was going to cause the appearance of those very plane parts, if they were still inside the building, to have been from a plane that entered the building. So what could have caused such a large quantity of extremely small wreckage? The FBI Director Robert Mueller himself confirmed that the word bomb, if they left the B off, in pent bomb, which is the FBI's code name for the entire 9/11 investigation, including the World Trade Center, Pentagon, and Shanksville, and everything else, is pent bomb. So that's their acronym. The FBI actually said to one of the 9/11 victims' family members, one of the famous Jersey girls, that the BOM, short for bomb, in pent bomb, actually stood for, from their investigation, bombs on the planes. Now, this is a theory. It's not my theory. But it is a theory that could explain these massive quantities. Most of the wreckage is extremely small, confetti-like pieces. And this is the onboard plane theory of BART. A missile from a military attack helicopter could have destroyed the plane that was the wreckage is on and around the helipad and going towards the wall beyond the helipad. Now, do I believe that this is the answer? I don't know, but there was a military attack helicopter that Vice President Cheney ordered to go to the Pentagon after they knew that 2 towers had been attacked in New York City. He ordered a military attack helicopter, a Marine Corps helicopter, to immediately be scrambled to the Pentagon to, quote, keep the plane, which hadn't even arrived yet, to keep the plane from going into the building. Now, most people in the movement, including Professor David Ray Griffin, has analyzed the evidence that they believe that the famous young man who came into the POC, the Emergency Operations Center in the basement of the White House, where Vice President Cheney was in charge shortly after the second attack in New York City, that this young man asked when the plane was 10 miles out, started at 50 miles out, then 10 miles out, do the orders still stand? Almost everyone in the movement has believed that that order was a stand down order. It was not. It was a shoot down order. And in fact, the plane was destroyed at the Pentagon. And this is the first page of the testimony. I don't know if it was sworn, but it was the testimony to one of the staff groups of the 9/11 Commission that by the young man is Douglas Cochrane, and he was the Vice President Cheney's own military aide. Okay, and he said that it was clearly that the order was clearly shoot down language. Okay, a Marine Corps helicopter was flying between I-395 and the heliport for almost 5 minutes, just before the plane's final approach, the actual plane, not Flight 77, the one that you saw the wreckage for, before it exploded into the fireball. And we know the time, it was 9:32 and 30 seconds. How do we know the time? We know the time from the heliport firehouse clock, which was stopped by this massive fireball and pressure wave that went into the open door of the helipad firehouse where the clock was and stopped it at 9:32 and about 30 seconds. Okay, this is just the information as to when that Marine Corps attack helicopter left, having buzzed between the heliport area and I-395 for almost 5 minutes, just before the plane was exploded by the helipad, that it actually took off literally 3 seconds. By took off, it never landed at the helipad, but it suddenly flew away. It suddenly flew away 3 seconds after the explosion that created the fireball by the helipad. So I believe that the near simultaneity of the takeoff of the helicopter and the explosion and fireball explains why many witnesses' vantage points only allowed them to see just the helicopter, like from the other side of the Pentagon, and not the heliport plane itself, that led them to believe that it was actually the helicopter itself that had crashed on the helipad and created the fireball. So there were witnesses to this helicopter all over the place. There are many witnesses to this erratically flying Marine Corps attack helicopter that was going between the helipad and I-395 just before the explosion that caused all of that wreckage and just before the fireball. That's the helicopter. And we know that because a number of witnesses have identified it who knew about planes, including the air traffic controller, Sean Boger, at the helipad. Okay, there's another witness here. By the way, everyone can have my slides. I have them on a PowerPoint, and if you have a way for me to put it in, otherwise you can give me your email address and I will send them all to you. The shattered carbon fiber wings from the crash of a remote-controlled drone. This is what I believe it was, a remote-controlled drone. The seismic evidence also supports that the plane exploded above the ground. In other words, the plane was exploded by some technical means, whether it was a bomb on board, like the FBI believes, or whether it was a remote control signal, a radio signal of some kind, that it was a drone, like a drone that was used in the Operation Northwoods proposal to President Kennedy. We don't know precisely the physical mechanism of the explosion of the plane, but it was exploded above the ground. All right, before it would have otherwise hit the building. So this is the seismic record, and this record was analyzed by Peter Tiradero, who is the Air Force crash and seismic record expert analyst. I talked to Professor Kim, who actually did the seismic record on the phone, and he said there was no above noise seismic signal at all at the Pentagon. Now let me remind you that there were 2.1 and 2.3 seismic signals at the World Trade Center Towers 1 and 2 for plane impacts over 70 stories above and over 90 stories above, and yet we are supposed to believe that almost literally on the ground, a 757 going at 530 miles an hour, impacting either the ground and or the lower part of the wall, created no above noise seismic signal whatsoever. Okay. If a 757 had struck anywhere near ground level, anywhere, there definitely would have been a seismic signal, above noise seismic signal, and there was not. So where precisely did the actual plane that was destroyed by the helipad crash? Okay, we know exactly where it crashed. So this is the helipad. This is a photograph, by the way, not long before 9/11. This is the helipad. This is the alleged impact point in column 14. And this thing right here was the original firehouse, which had been taken down just not long before 9/11. And this was the new one they constructed. So we have multiple witnesses telling us that the plane came in like this and it hit exactly there. Now, it's not that far from the alleged official story impact point, but it is not the official story alleged impact point. Okay, now this is one of the slides that Craig showed, and it's an important slide, and it shows these so-called North Path witnesses. I do not focus myself on the Citgo gas station, which was here. This is the Navy Annex. What you're about to see is the importance of these witnesses here at the Sheraton Hotel. This is critical. And I have interviewed a witness here who saw everything through a huge plate glass window on the top floor of the ballroom of the Sheraton as it happened. And you're about to see that testimony. But what's important is this is the official storyline that is based upon the flight data recorder that the government claims was found inside the alleged C-ring exit hole on the inside of the C-ring, the third ring in a 5 of the Pentagon. But we know that it didn't even impact there anyway, so it couldn't have been the exit hole of the plane to begin with. Okay, so what's important here is that all of these lines, they're not the same, but they're all to the left or the north of the official storyline. Okay, that's what's important. I don't make the right or left, I don't make the Citgo station that critical because all of these lines are approximate from the witnesses, from their memories. And it's also important to know that this witness, Hemphill, He believed that the plane went straight over the top, almost the center top of the Citgo gas station. And that's very different from the witnesses, including the two Pentagon policemen. So not all of these so-called north paths align with each other, but they are all contradictory to the official story path. That's what matters. So evidence the plane could not have been Flight 77. This is very critical, and it's the most important part of my presentation. American Airlines, about on the 14th, early in the morning, the government claims, the FBI and the Pentagon claim, that they allegedly found a flight data recorder and a cockpit voice recorder. The cockpit voice recorder more damaged than the flight data recorder, the FDR, just inside the alleged C-ring exit hole of a plane on the inside of the third ring of 5 rings into the Pentagon. Now, right after those two so-called black boxes were given to the NTSB, the National Transportation Safety Board, for analysis of the data on them, which is what they did. When they were finished with the analysis, then FBI Director Mueller went on national television, and he stated that, and he showed a photograph, which I'm going to show you. He's going to show you a photograph of what they claimed was what was left of the cockpit voice recorder. Now, the cockpit voice recorder, they claimed, had no retrievable data on it. But what's very strange about that is they claim they got almost all the data from the flight data recorder. Now, because both of these black boxes are in the tail section of a plane, not far from one another, because that's the part of a plane that usually, it's less damaged or survives a crash, which did happen by the heliport at the Pentagon. Because they're both in the tail end of the plane, the very fact that one of them was stated right after the photograph was put out by the FBI, this photograph, American Airlines went public with an official press release saying this can't be from any cockpit voice recorder from Flight 77 that left Dulles Airport in the morning, or from any of our Boeing airliners that were flying on 9/11. So if the cockpit voice recorder could not have been from Flight 77, let alone any American Airlines 757, neither could the flight data recorder. So the flight data recorder, even though it's a physical object, number one, it was not from Flight 77. And number two, the data has no relevance whatsoever to solving this mystery. So the NTSB report had this photograph of the damaged cockpit voice recorder, and they found that it was a magnetic tape model, but it's the wrong kind. And American Airlines put out that official press release. Now, I thank Xander Arena for his evidence that the image on the outside, from the outside security camera videos, is too small for a 757. And I've proven in other ways that it couldn't have been. So evidence that the plane at the Pentagon was not the one that left Dulles Airport. This is very important. Indianapolis civilian FAA air traffic control were watching live on radar and officially reported that Flight 77, which it still was after leaving Dulles at that point, they were tracking it, that blip for Flight 77 suddenly began to descend approximately 6,000 feet at 8:54 and 43 seconds while it was still flying west, and while its transponder was still on, because they were looking at the transponder blip. This is well before the official data from that alleged flight data recorder that can't be from Flight 77 or any American Airlines Boeing 757 flying on 9/11. The official so-called data from that, quote, FDR data, the analysis is that it didn't start descending until after it turned and flew back east. Now, any kindergartner knows that the same plane, physical plane, cannot do both. It cannot descend going west and then be seen by the so-called FDR data to continue level at its cruising altitude, approximately 35,000 feet, and then start to descend well after the turn. It's a different plane. This is a very important book by a Dutch investigator who looked at radar data. You can order it. And it's called 9/11, The Other Truth. And it's a detailed analysis of how the plane, not just the Pentagon plane that first left the airport, but others as well, were swapped, just like Operation Northwoods on 9/11. And this is a video that you can watch online of how the CIA and the military swap out planes. Was the final approach path the official story path, which is the south path, so-called, or the north path? And if it was the north path, of course, it could not have been Flight 77, and we know it wasn't. Anyway, okay, there's that famous line again. Now I'm going to use my pointer for a moment, and right here we're going to see about this witness. And the witnesses in the Sheraton Hotel, which was on a north, as it were, a north path line. The plane came over the Sheraton, immediately over the roof, came over here on the side of the Navy Annex, came up to this corner of the Navy Annex, and came over like this to the north of the Cloverleaf. Now, this is very important. The Citizens Investigation Team and Craig Ranke, in their analysis, they assume that the plane the SIT people believe it flew over. There's no evidence of that, of course, because there's all the wreckage. But Craig Ranke's analysis is that the plane came in on this path, but he assumes that so it had to have flown over. He believes that the official story alleged impact point area. But in fact, it came up a little bit further to the north, and that's where all that wreckage is. So we have conflicting witnesses, and that's part of our problem. And that's the reason that our movement and the American people in the world need all of the videotapes from the Pentagon that the FBI and the government are still withholding. There are all of these North Path witnesses. Now, this is extremely important. So the Sheraton Hotel was just further to the left, further west than the Navy Annex. And I personally interviewed a worker who was on the very top floor in the ballroom when the plane went over the building, at least over the side of the building. She took me up to the top floor, and she took me to this huge plate glass window, and she stood there and she showed me exactly what happened. What she said was that when she and two other of her female workers were there on that morning, that suddenly there was this shrieking sound above, outside. Of course, that was the roof. There was a shrieking sound, and then the entire building, and of course, mostly on the top floor, because that's where they were, shook so much she was afraid that the building was going to collapse. And right after that shaking, the worst part of the shaking, suddenly this immense plane, as she said, filled the entire window as it swooped down towards the Pentagon and off to the left and then back to the right. And then there was a huge fireball, which she kept shaking her head, and she said it was horrible, and she got very emotional. I do know her identity, and I do know through her the identity of the other two witnesses who saw precisely the same thing out the same plate glass window. And there is another very important witness, and that is the witness, Deb Anloff. She was on a floor just one or two floors down below and saw precisely the same thing, used almost exactly the same language, that it looked like it was right outside my window. So we know that the plane came over the Sheraton Hotel. In my opinion, there's no better evidence, even better than the Citgo gas station determinations, because a lot of those Citgo lines are not identical to the left or north of the Citgo gas station. What's most important to me is the witnesses of the Sheraton Hotel. And the Lawyers Committee for 9/11 Inquiry is going to be filing an FOIA specifically targeting the videos from the Sheraton Hotel facing the side of the Pentagon. This incredibly important witness Alan Wallace, who was standing literally next to the fire truck by the firehouse. He was right at the front right of the fire truck. His back was to the wall. And he said he heard a shriek and he looked up and there was a white plane that had stripes down the side. From his vantage point, it was coming in to what appeared to be his left a little bit, to the north of the cloverleaf. And that at the point that he saw it, he estimated it was about 25 feet only over the ground and about 200 feet away. And that plane came directly to him. He and his fellow firefighters ran for their lives. They were injured, they were burned, but they did survive. And he experienced the pressure and the heat of the fireball instantly. And when he came out, this is his testimony. When he came out, he saw all of that devastation, all of the burned grass that I showed you at the beginning. The plane was so close to the heliport firehouse and his fire truck that was parked right outside of it, that Alan Wallace initially thought, and he's gone public with this, that he thought that the left wingtip had actually maybe hit the back of his fire truck. That's how close it was. And there are all of these witnesses saying that the left wing touched the helipad, it scraped on the helipad or close to the helipad, and then there was a huge fireball. So we don't know exactly what caused the plane to be exploded or to explode, but that is what happened. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Barbara.